we are going to get into it with our guest today. He's been on the show before. We're happy to have him back. Please welcome back to the show bail attorney Ken Good. Ken, how are you?
Good. Thank you so much for having me.
Yeah. Thanks for coming back. It's good to talk to you again. I feel like, I feel like next time we talk, when we do this again in like 18 months or whatever, we're just going to have half the world's on fire. It's like it's getting worse every time. Like what is the next step before this actually gets any better, you know?
Yeah, I agree. We keep, well, I mean, is it really getting better, or is this a sign of a little bit of healing where we have such disagreement on how to address the problem? And so the fighting is no longer about whether there's a problem, it's about the solution. And maybe it's progress.
Yeah, that's a very optimistic way to look at it. I applaud your optimism. I'm not sure I have that same view on it, but I do applaud your optimism. It is interesting. It is a sign when people say are willing to admit there is a problem. But God, I feel like this is probably something we'll touch on more. But and with everything going on, it just seems like I always say the country's divided about 50-50 politically, right? And then from there you have subsets where you have single issue voters and people who, like you just talk about conservatives. Like it doesn't make sense that like your small Christian conservative families are also the same people who vote for the same people who are like capitalist corporation tax shell companies. Like those aren't the same things. They're just single issue voters, So we get so compartmentalized that and then you actually get down to the people that actually could or would do anything in this country, and I feel like it's segmented. The percentages are so small, it gets so fragmented.
I still think we're showing the damage from identity politics, probably like what you just said, where we have, what I would say one side of the electorate that is just spending all their time. You can't vote for the other side because of X, and the
Right.
X keeps changing. So right now, while I would say they don't really have a plan on the border, they're just saying you can't vote for them because they're too mean.
Right,
You can't
right.
vote for them because they're doing this, and and sometimes it's made up stories. Like, it's not that they were going after a illegal immigrant or illegal alien, whatever you want to call him, and he decided to abandon his son and leave, and they took the son to protect him until they could find the dad. Versus the story that you're on the news that they arrested a child, and suddenly he's showing up on the halftime of the Super Bowl, and
Yeah.
the guy's handing him his Grammy. I mean, that's really, I mean, I think that's a good sign in the long run because one side cannot admit. I mean, they cannot admit there's a problem, because if they admit it, then we talk about solutions. And so when you are at the point where you can't even admit there's a problem, and we've been there for a while, but the public's starting to see it. Remember, for how long did we hear, don't believe what your own eyes, crime is going down. So
Right.
and the FBI statistics support that. And it turned out they didn't, and they got updated and they show crime going up, and they're still incomplete. So I think I still think that's a sign, a healthy sign. And we've been through this in the past. We committed this same cycle in the 60s where we felt safe and we were more lenient and forgiving in our criminal laws. And then crime started going up. We had disagreement on how to address it. And one side of the electorate refused to participate. And so we had a backlash, and we got Reagan, and partly because of crime and the war on drugs. And I think partly we've seen that, and that's partly the reason that Trump 2.0 was elected back into office: immigration and crime.
Yeah.
And I think, when you tell the public you don't know what you're talking about, crime is not going up, and they look and see people getting hurt on the streets, and they're like, what you're saying doesn't make sense. It's just going to get worse. Now, Minnesota is a really good example of the truth versus the lie. Right now is, you can't, what's going on? It just seems like it's a big cover or subterfuge to cover up the fraud that's being uncovered there. And so, over time, the public is going to find the truth, and then when they find it, if it's contrary to what they're being told, there will be a backlash. And so,
well,
eventually,
I mean, in theory, I in theory that makes sense, and I think in some cases that is true. But I think on a bigger scale, I got to give you some pushback, because we've had this entire dump of this, like the Epstein stuff, right? This dump of information, and most people are like, oh yeah, so all the elites are pedophiles, basically. You're like, and everyone's like, yeah, but that halftime show is real bad. And you're like, yeah, I feel like that's not the biggest issue right now, I mean, I think people are either too complacent or too, again, compartmentalized, and so easily manipulated. And this is where I struggle with all of this, is because I think both extreme sides have lost their minds. I think we've completely lost the plot on both sides. And, I mean, it's with anything, somewhere in the middle is always the truth, right? And also in politics and in massaging the way a country of, hundreds of millions of people, 50 states, with many different viewpoints and stuff, you kind of have to make some compromises sometimes,
someone, I wish I knew who said this, but someone said one time that a democracy relies upon the consent of the losing party to govern.
Mm-hmm.
And if you think about it, for the last few election cycles, the losing party hasn't consented to be governed.
Right, right.
I mean, instead, with the election of Trump won, it was an illegitimate election. He really didn't win. And that's really carried through. Every time, one side loses, there's this big argument about whether it was legitimate. And that really is withholding the consent of the losing party to being governed. And I think a lot of the problems that we are having is a result of that.
Yeah.
And I think that's a result of money in politics pushing to the extremes. I mean, the big money from the billionaires that set up these, political action groups. Whereas if you do not agree with their ideas, which I would agree are extreme sometimes, then you'll have an opponent that does agree with them. And that's where we are really on a lot of politics. So that's pushing everybody to the extremes on both sides.
Yeah. I mean, take it back to this Epstein thing that was such a big, obviously such a big issue. And, Thomas Massey being one of the only people who championed this to push this through. And the result of that is basically Miriam Adelson and throwing billions of dollars at getting people primaried, right? And you're talking about one of the only people who's willing to go to bat and be honest for the American people. And the result is, well, we're going to do everything we can to use our money to get you out of that position and find someone who's sympathetic to this administration.
I read an article recently, maybe it's a blog post, and it's, probably from the perspective of the right, but they were giving really strong kudos to Trump from a negotiating standpoint on the Epstein files, because, he promised transparency and then didn't deliver it.
Right.
And the argument that was being made by the poster was that Trump was using that in the background on all these international negotiations, saying, I'm hearing that y'all are really all over the Epstein files, and I'm trying to keep that from coming out. But, if the Democrats force my hand. And the publication of the Epstein files has really been devastating on public figures internationally. I mean, there's some Prince Prince Andrew. I mean, multiple princes, but Prince Andrew is no longer a prince.
Right.
And I think after the last release, he had to leave the place that he was living in the middle of the night. Well, there's another royal couple from another country that are, the wife is being said maybe denied being called queen as a result of this.
Wow.
And so, and then look at the Clintons. I would say the devastation that was supposed to happen to Trump, which was the whole mantra on why those things had to be made public, was all turns out to be nothing so far. And, it also goes kind of against the timeline. The timeline was that Trump had issues with him early on and cut off a relationship with him. And that's kind of the timeline where he kicked him out of Mar-a-Lago and said, don't come back, because of the way he treated an employee, which is very consistent with the way Trump treats people. But then, when you get the talking points in the talking heads, then that can't be true. We find out that, the people from the left will never believe this, but, so far it looks like Trump was the voice of reason in the Epstein files. And people will never believe that. The conspiracy theorists will say that he's covering up before they'll ever agree with that.
Sure. Well, here's the problem is that and I don't blame this solely on Trump's administration. This goes beyond that too. You could, if we go deep enough, I would say all the way back to Kennedy. But there's good reason for the public to not trust the, alphabet organizations and what they say is true. You're talking about files that 3 months